$7 billion did not vanish in a single dramatic theft. It was absorbed piece by piece through certificates of deposit sold as safe, respectable, and almost immune to ordinary market danger. Behind that promise stood Alan Stanford, Stanford International Bank, and an offshore financial empire centered in Antigua. Thousands of investors trusted the appearance of stability. Many would eventually discover that safety had been manufactured. A certificate of deposit is normally a time-limited deposit held by a bank with a stated return and restrictions on withdrawal. Stanford International Bank presented its certificates as unusually attractive alternatives to ordinary bank products, offering high interest while emphasizing the institution's strength and independence from turbulent markets. The appeal was simple: competitive returns, apparent security, and the reassuring language of professional finance. The mechanism became dangerous because the bank's public image concealed the destination of customer money. Investigators found that new deposits were used to support obligations to older customers, pay commissions, finance Stanford's lifestyle, and sustain the appearance of a thriving investment operation. That structure resembles a Ponzi scheme in which incoming funds are used to satisfy earlier investors rather than generating legitimate profits. Alan Stanford's power did not come only from spreadsheets or legal documents. It came from credibility. His name appeared across companies, offices, sporting events, charitable associations, and elite social networks. Respectability became part of the product. The more established Stanford appeared, the less urgently customers questioned how an offshore bank could consistently deliver returns that seemed both generous and safe. The geography mattered. Stanford International Bank operated in Antigua, while Stanford's investment and sales operations reached into the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. That separation created distance between the people selling the certificates and the institution holding the deposits. For customers, the arrangement sounded international and sophisticated. For regulators, it created a maze of jurisdiction, authority, and responsibility. That maze was not an accidental inconvenience. It became a defensive wall. An offshore bank could invoke its local identity, while American operations emphasized their domestic presence and professional infrastructure. Customers encountered polished representatives, impressive offices, and carefully controlled information. The crucial question was harder to answer. Which regulator was responsible for proving what the bank actually owned? Inside the sales system, persuasion converted uncertainty into confidence. Workers presented the certificates as conservative instruments, using the vocabulary of preservation, stability, and prudent growth. Commissions rewarded successful sales, giving employees a financial reason to keep the pipeline active. The system did not require every salesperson to understand the entire fraud. It required only that enough people continue repeating the approved explanation. Due diligence means the process of independently checking a company's claims, finances, management, and risks before committing money. In Stanford's case, the need for due diligence was obscured by the very signals investors commonly use as substitutes for investigation: polished branding, institutional language, wealthy associations, and apparent regulatory presence. When authority looks convincing, many people stop asking who has verified it. The bank's statements and public assurances supplied another layer of concealment. Analysts later examined how reported assets, investment performance, and liquidity were represented while the underlying business struggled to support its promises. This was not merely a matter of optimistic marketing. It was a system in which information was filtered so that customers saw confidence, while the financial foundations beneath that confidence remained inaccessible. The illusion depended on time. Every successful withdrawal helped validate the next sale. Every renewed certificate suggested that earlier customers had been satisfied. As long as deposits continued arriving, the institution could meet selected obligations and preserve the appearance of normal banking. But a structure funded by new money is always vulnerable to hesitation. The moment confidence weakens, arithmetic becomes more powerful than reputation. That moment arrived when the financial crisis intensified scrutiny across the banking world. Customers became more alert to liquidity, solvency, and the difference between a promise and an asset. Stanford's system faced the pressure that such arrangements cannot withstand indefinitely. Too many withdrawals, too few genuine resources, and growing demands for proof. The facade did not collapse because the fraud suddenly began. It collapsed because concealment could no longer keep pace. The Securities and Exchange Commission had received warnings about Stanford's operations, yet the institution continued operating for years before decisive action halted the machinery. That failure exposed a painful weakness in financial oversight. Regulators may possess fragments of information without assembling them quickly enough, especially when a business crosses borders and presents itself as complex, wealthy, and politically connected. Regulatory confusion can be more valuable to a fraudster than secrecy. If investors believe one agency is monitoring a bank, while that agency believes another authority bears responsibility, oversight becomes a series of gaps rather than a continuous examination. Stanford exploited the distinction between an offshore bank and American investment operations, using institutional boundaries to make the whole enterprise harder to see. Court documents and testimony later helped reconstruct the architecture. Customer deposits supported earlier obligations. Sales commissions encouraged continued inflows. Corporate resources were diverted toward personal wealth and lifestyle. Public confidence was maintained through reputation and controlled information. Each element reinforced the others, creating a machine that did not depend on one lie, but on an ecosystem of partial truths and unanswered questions. The victims were not simply chasing reckless speculation. Many were seeking income, preservation, or a dependable return on savings. Some had been reassured by years of apparent performance. Others trusted advisors and sales personnel who seemed to possess specialized knowledge. Blaming those customers would confuse vulnerability with responsibility. The central betrayal was that information necessary to judge the risk had been withheld or distorted by the people selling the product. The damage spread across households, businesses, and communities in several countries. Lost savings could mean postponed retirements, damaged family security, and obligations that could no longer be met. The harm also traveled through institutions that had relied on Stanford's reputation. When a bank uses the language of safety while concealing insolvency, it does more than remove money. It contaminates confidence in the vocabulary of banking itself. Alan Stanford's psychology was expressed through scale and presentation. The construction of a vast public identity suggested a belief that authority could be accumulated until it became difficult to challenge. Luxury was not merely personal indulgence. It functioned as evidence. Offices, connections, and visible success told observers that a person surrounded by power must possess legitimate power. In that environment, skepticism could feel less rational than trust. Yet the fraud's endurance cannot be explained by one man's ambition alone. It required employees willing to sell, institutions willing to accept appearances, customers unable to obtain independent verification, and regulators unable to coordinate effectively. That does not distribute guilt evenly. It reveals how financial deception becomes durable when incentives reward continuation and penalties arrive only after the losses are irreversible. The 2012 conviction of Alan Stanford established the legal consequence of the scheme, but a verdict could not restore the years consumed by uncertainty or rebuild every damaged balance sheet. Legal proceedings can identify criminal responsibility. They cannot fully repair the social contract that allows ordinary people to believe a financial institution is telling the truth about their money. The Stanford case also demonstrated why offshore finance can be both legitimate and vulnerable. International banking is not inherently fraudulent, and distance alone does not prove wrongdoing. The danger emerges when distance obstructs verification, when regulatory boundaries become shields, and when attractive returns are treated as proof of safety rather than compensation for risk. Complexity should invite more scrutiny, not less. The deepest lesson lies in the conversion of trust into an asset that could be sold. Stanford did not need customers to understand every transaction. He needed them to believe that someone else had already checked. That psychological shortcut is common in finance, where credentials and institutional symbols often replace direct evidence. The fraud succeeded because confidence became transferable, while accountability remained fragmented. $7 billion is an enormous figure, but its meaning is measured in individual decisions. A deposit renewed, a warning ignored, a question unanswered, a regulator delayed, a commission paid. The money moved through a system that looked stable because each participant saw only part of it. By the time the full picture emerged, the appearance of safety had consumed the substance of it. The story of Alan Stanford therefore ends without the comfort of a single villain explaining everything. His conviction answered who was held criminally responsible. It did not eliminate the conditions that make financial deception persuasive: admiration for wealth, faith in polished institutions, confusion across jurisdictions, and the human desire for secure returns without painful uncertainty. The lasting safeguard is not charisma, complexity, or reputation. It is evidence, independently examined before trust becomes irreversible.